Hi, everyone. I'm Megan Barnhart here in All Writers Welcome, the ultimate writing group. And I want to talk about finishing the chapter today. Both literally the chapter and then also extending that a bit to um, talk about finishing in writing a little bit more broadly. And I want to start with an image that is very powerful for me, and you might relate to it. When I was learning to swim as a little kid, there was a preschool teacher who used to offer swimming lessons. And when we'd learned to float and we were ready to kind of like doggy paddle toward him, he would stand in the middle of the pool with his arms outstretched, and one at a time we would swim to him. And that was so powerful because I knew exactly where I was going, and I knew once I got there, I was safe. So that's what I want to invite you to hold in mind as I talk a little bit about finishing the chapter is what if you were moving towards something that was already defined and that once you got there, you knew you would be safe. And for me, what that looks like is establishing the end first. What was really powerful about swimming lessons with Tim Craig was that he was this big, burly guy standing in the middle of the pool. You could not miss him. He had a big beard and he was a presence, right? I knew exactly where I was going. There was no mistaking where that endpoint was. And then also he was welcoming us toward him. So the way to define your ending is to think through your chapter and ask yourself, what is the last thing that has to get accomplished in your chapter before you can move on? Now, if you're not able to answer that question, this means you have to backtrack more. So you may have to start not by looking at your chapter, but by going back to your plan or by getting some clarity and thinking through. But however you can, I want you to get to what has to happen for my chapter to end. And for people who don't really like plotting, I don't want you to feel disappointed and think, oh, she's saying I have to lay it out and be really rigid and structured. It doesn't have to be laid out linearly, but reflect. What do you want to get out of this chapter? What's your goal? You know, if your point of this particular chapter is to give us a certain emotional component of the character or to show something about a relationship, then that could be your endpoint. It might not be a chronological endpoint, but you might say, okay, I know I'm finished when from this chapter people can see that so and so wants X, or that, you know, person A and person B have a relationship that's like this. So define that for yourself, give yourself that endpoint. I really like actually writing the last part. Hi, Joanne. I'm glad you're here. I know you're saying you can't finish your chapter. If you have a particular question around that, I would love it if you put it in and give me some more, a sense of what's going on. Please, you know, tell me what feels like it's keeping you stuck. And then see if this strategy feels like it would work for you, because if you can write the last image or the last line or the last sentence of your chapter first, not only will you know where you're going, but you're going to have more motivation to get there. So giving yourself that ending first will be, you'll write up until that point and you won't need that last line. And what this does, besides to find an endpoint for you, is to get rid of some of that, the kind of denial or excuse making that we all get to sometimes, where we know we're not finished with a section, but we call it finished because we're just done writing. So I don't know, maybe this doesn't happen for other people, but I'll fess up. This has definitely happened to me where I go, oh yeah, I'm done with that section. And then the next time I go back to writing, the very first thing I have to do is actually finish that task before I can move on to the next thing, which feels crummy. You know, I want to be able to work on what I had set on to work on. I don't want to be pushed back and have work that I thought was already completed or that should have already been completed take away from the new work. So give yourself that last line or that last image or the last place you want the character to be in the chapter, and then write up to it. And you're going to not have that struggle of where do I end. You're going to already know where you're ending. So that's the chapter, and that's how you'd finish the chapter. Here's my take on why I think it's important to. It's really hard to maintain momentum for a scene if you do it on multiple days, unless you have a really good discipline. Or if you have a way of getting into that mode. Maybe you have a strategy that you use to really get back into the part of your brain that had that scene in mind. And if you do, that's fantastic. And this advice may not apply. But I think for most of us, once we get up and walk away for more than the time it takes to, get a cup of coffee or use the restroom or look out the window, we've interrupted our momentum. And I would advise that it's much more important to write a truncated short version of your chapter all in one sitting than to write the full detailed and have to break it up. Okay, so Joanne is saying 2 characters, JR and Honey, were going to arrest this guy. He broke away and got shot by the police, and his mom was JR's lover. In the next chapter, she goes after JR and Honey with a butcher and other knife. Oh my goodness, this sounds very intense. Yikes. So, Joanne, do you know how you want things to be resolved would be my first question. Do you already have in mind what will happen, or are you still deciding about whether they actually arrest this guy or whether he's going to get away? So decide. And if you're struggling to decide, here's a great tool, and you can use it for, okay, so you're saying you don't know. All right, here's a tool you can use for writing, you can also use for life. Pretend you have decided. So this might start with you brainstorming a couple of different possibilities. Okay, so he gets away. So we're going to imagine he gets away. From that decision, map out the things that would happen. Look at them on paper as if that is what's going to happen, right? Like as if you're reading this in somebody else's story. Okay, so what will be the consequences for him? What will be the repercussions in the lives of JR and Honey and for other characters? Look at that and ask, do you like it? And if there's anything that you see that's making you, oh no, that would be, this book, I wouldn't care for it, try to name it. So the power of pretending you have decided is it actually takes away the anxiety. When we go to make a decision in life or in writing, there's a natural anxiety that's about, am I making the right decision? And if you pretend you have decided, you're at least removing that layer of anxiety. There still might be anxiety, but you're going, oh, I don't have to worry whether I'm making the right decision now because it's done. So now I'm just looking at it and saying, do I like it? And if you find you do, awesome, then you're home free. But if not, imagine you've decided on the opposite outcome or on a different outcome. And here's a place where mind mapping or brainstorming might be really helpful. If you put the outcome in the center, like he gets away in the middle of a piece of paper, and just let your mind go wild with everything that comes up. Form way. What are the consequences? Who wins? Who loses? Like, how does this affect everybody else, plot-wise, character-wise? And just look at that web. And you might make just 2, maybe one brainstorm for he gets away and one brainstorm for he's taken to jail, and that's that. So to stay with this idea of, I'm veering a little bit away about why it's important to finish the chapter, and I'll come back to how you expand that to how do you use that strategy a bit more. But just to stay with this thread for Joanne, if you make those 2 brainstorms and you're still not sure, zoom back even more and ask yourself, what is the message I'm writing in my book? What is the theme that I want to show people? What is the feeling that I want to give people? What's the emotional impact that I want to give people? What if his mother tried to murder? Oh my goodness. So there's some kind of retributions. It sounds like you have a lot of ideas that are possible. What I highly recommend, Joanne, is map them out. Map out he gets away. Map out there's another murder scenario. Map out he ends up in jail. Maybe just take those 3. Fill up, as much of the page as you're inspired to when you just let your ideas flow freely. See what outcome you get. And then look at those 3 brainstorms and say, okay, which of these is getting me what I want to tell people? Because I'm assuming that you want to tell the story for a reason. It might not be that you have a really big message. You don't have to have a huge overarching theme that you want to tell people. You know, this, you don't have to be writing for that purpose. You want people to feel, or I bet there's something you want them to think, or I bet that you want people to view in a certain way. So I hope that makes sense, where you can ask yourself which of these, and maybe limit yourself to those 3 plans so it doesn't become overwhelming, right? Because there are so many different options. Limit yourself to those 3, map them out, and then ask which of these is closest to the way I want people to think and feel and relate to these characters. So I hope that's helpful. And you can do it. You can do it. So I want to briefly just get back to this notion of how you can do it. And it's writing that last line and then just writing almost like a summary of your chapter, because a trick in writing is that it's easier to go back and expand. If you already have the beginning of the chapter and the end of the chapter, it's a lot easier for most writers. I mean, not make this as if everybody writes the same, but for most of the writers I've worked with, it is a lot easier for them to go back and expand by going to a part of the scene and saying, well, why did this happen? Or, you know, can I turn that into dialogue so that people know what's going on? And then it's a lot easier to expand than it is to keep up the momentum of detail long enough to get to the end. So use a shortcut, be brief, write a really sparse chapter, and then you can go back and fill in details. Can I repeat which part of it? This video, Joanne, will be up in the All Writers Welcome, so you can go. I'm not sure which part you wanted me to repeat, but you can go back and definitely rewatch. And if there's something I didn't to or that wasn't clear, please, I invite you to just put it in the comments under this video and I will get to it. Okay, I have got to wrap now, but thank you so much for bringing your questions, and let's definitely continue this conversation in the group. All right, see you everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day.